In this video, I'm excited to show you a step-by-step process on how to create user interfaces in Java. We're going to start off by introducing some basic components and then progress into making our UI actually functional. This will be super useful for you if you plan on creating cool user interface projects. Without further ado, let's get started. So I'm starting by creating a simple JFrame object. And then I'm setting the dimensions to 400 by 400. Okay, at this point I'm simply adding a panel to my frame. So this is the general structure. So I'm going to say jPanel is equals to new jPanel, right? And then I want to set the size to be the same as the JFrame. Now we've created the panel, we need to make the panel part of the frame that's going to be displayed. So this is done by just saying frame.add panel. Then we need to make sure to set the frame and the panel to be visible. Specifically say frame.setVisible to true. Let's see what happens when we run it now. So you see we have our frame showing up. So now let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's create a layout for our panel and add buttons to it. So I'm going to be simply creating a flow layout and then adding that to the panel. You can read more about this in documentation. So you can Google a layout in Java and then read the Java documentation to find out more. And then I'm simply setting the panel layout to the new layout object, which is F. So I'm saying panel.setLayout F. Now we can add components to the panel. They'll follow the specified layout. So in this case, I'm creating 4 buttons. I'm going to name them A, B, C, and D. And then I'll be adding these buttons to the panel. Let's run to see if these buttons show up. So you'll see that this is confusing. Why are my buttons not showing up? This is where I have to remind you that the flow of execution is important. Have a look. The order of execution matters, so you must make sure you add the elements in the correct order. So you see we added the buttons only after we've added the panel to the frame. So the frame is showing you the panel without the added buttons. So what we need to do is just simply reorder this. So let's see if the buttons show up. Great. So we have A, B, C, D as buttons which are showing up. Right. So we've made a lot of good progress, and if you are following along, you can feel free to pause this video anytime. Make sure you add all the components you want to the panel before adding it to the frame and setting the frame to be visible. But you'll see that these buttons so far are not doing anything interesting. We haven't added any implementation. So let's try to do something interesting. We need our components to listen and wait for us to click. Then when we click on them, to perform a specific action. So that's the general structure of action listeners. In other words, we need our components to have listeners which will listen to events. One way to do this is to create an action listener object. Let's create it together. But before doing this, I want to create this method in another class. So follow along with me here. So I've created the test class which I'll be using to render the UI. And then I'm simply creating a method show UI. So this will contain everything we've written so far in our previous code. Go back here, simply copying everything and pasting it here. Right. So that whenever I run the show UI method, this method over here, whenever I run that method, the UI is going to show up as desired. Alright, so let's continue. So in the main class, in the main method, I'm simply creating an instance of the test class and then simply running the show UI method. So it's just a restructuring of the components and the classes so that it's nice and compact. Let's go back to our test class and continue our execution. So we were busy creating our action listener object. To do this, I have to create a class which implements the action listener. Let's have a look. So make sure we have all these inputs: java.awt.star, java.event.star, and the other one. So this action performed will be executed when our listener hears the event. In our case, when the listener hears the button being clicked, it will execute this code that we write in the action performed. So far I want us to just print, hey, you've clicked on me. So I'm simply creating an instance of my action listener. So it's going to be the instance of the class below. For now, let's simply print the message, you clicked me. So I'm just going to say system.out.print, you've clicked me. Now I need to add the listener to my button. So I'm going to say button.add action listener. So whenever I run my code and click on the button, it says, hey, you've clicked me. But you see, when I'm clicking the other buttons, for example, when you click B, C or D, it doesn't say you've clicked me. Why is that? It's because we need to add action listeners to the other buttons as well, for them to listen for when they're clicked. So I'm simply going to be adding those listeners. Now when I click A, it says you've clicked me. When I click B, it says you've clicked me. When I click D, it says you've clicked me, right? So we can do much more with this action performed method. Let's explore different possibilities, right? So in this case, I'm printing e.getSource.toString, which gives me this long string of the source of the event. But I can do something much more specific. If I say e.getActionCommand and I print that out, it's gonna give me the text that's on the button. So let's run this and see. When I click A, it says you've clicked me, and then it's showing A over there. When I click B, it says you've clicked me, but also shows you the action command, so you can know which button you pressed. And then from here you can simply write if statements and do specific implementation depending on which button you clicked. So these are not the only components that you can add, and the action listener is not the only listener that you can add. There are many other types of components and listeners you can add. Let's explore another example where you have panels responding to your actions. So this is a little bit different. So I'm going to be simply creating a new panel. I'm going to set the color to, let's set it to red for now. I'm going to add the panel P to my already existing panel. I want to set the dimensions to 20 by 20. So you'll see it added my panel, but it has a small size. Let me try to change the size and see. Let me make it a whole lot bigger. Let's say 200, 100. My size is not changing. This is because we're using the set size method instead of setting the preferred size. So the preferred size would enforce whatever size you set and then have the panel be that size. So whenever you want to set the size of panels that you add on top of other panels, then you want to play around with the set preferred size. Now what if you want the panel to respond to your events? You may try to add an action listener. Let's see if that works. You see, we cannot add, there is no method to add an action listener for panels. But this is not the end of the world. We can add other listeners to the panel. For example, we can add a mouse listener. Okay, to create the mouse listener object, I'm simply going to create a class which implements the mouse listener interface, and then I'll have to implement all of these methods. You could extend the mouse listener adapter to make your life easier, because remember, the difference between an interface and an adapter is that the adapter allows you to choose whichever methods you want to implement, but the mouse adapter is not the mouse interface. The adapter already defined these empty methods, and then you can choose to override which ones. But for the purposes of this, let's stick to using the interface. So for this one, I'm just gonna print out "you've clicked me" whenever I click on the panel. I'm gonna say p.add_mouse_listener new, and then I'm gonna add my mouse listener. Now does it work? Let's see. So I'm gonna try clicking on my panel. It's gonna say "you've clicked me," right? Let's try to click on it again. When you click on a button, let's see, it says you've clicked button A. When you've clicked the panel, it says you've clicked me, which is exactly what we have, because in the mouse listener we have public void mouse clicked, and then we're saying system.out.println you've clicked me. So I want to emphasize this. Note that your listeners, like your mouse listeners and other listeners, they're interfaces. So you need to implement all the abstract methods defined in those interfaces, even though we're only using one method out of all the listed ones. But to make our code cleaner, so if we extend the mouse adapter, we have the flexibility of only picking which methods we want to override, right? But I want you to take note, I want you to actually test this out. Press F3 on your keyboard when you hover over the mouse adapter, and then you'll see how it's defined. When we use the mouse adapter here, we don't have to actually implement all the other methods, because we can simply override from those listed methods. So that's the benefit of using a mouse adapter. Let's add a key event to our panel. So I'm going to create a class, myKeyEvent, extends, or let's rather say implements key listener. So let's rename that. I've misspelled that to key event. I'll change it now to key listener. But I'm simply creating my key listener class. So one thing to note about the key listener, the key pressed method is executed when the key is pressed. The moment you press the key. And then the key released is executed whenever you release the key. So it's just a side note to make sure you're familiar with the details of that one. Say I want to print the key pressed when the panel listens for a key event. So we haven't added the key listener to our panel yet, so let's do that. But whenever you try to run this, you'll notice that the key pressed doesn't print. Why is that? Let's have a look at it again. For events to be detected by a listener, the component with the listener object must be focused. But what is this focus that we're talking about? Let me show you. So whenever you click on those buttons, you'll notice when I click on the buttons, the listeners are actually detecting the events and then executing the action performed method. So have a look again. When I clicked on those buttons, they got focus. They're the component actively focused on. Notice the black box around the buttons when you click them. Let's show you again. So let me click on B. You'll see that there's going to be a little black box. That means I'm actively focused on B. Now, what does this have to do with our panel not detecting the keys? Your panel needs to be the active component in your window in order to listen to events and respond to them. So we have useful methods to allow us to do that. So first and foremost, we need to set the panel to be focusable. So I'm gonna say p.setFocusable to true. And then I need to request focus in window. But you'll notice I've requested focus in window, but still button A, the first button, still has focus in it. Let's have a look at why is that. So the problem, it was caused because yes, we set the P to be focusable. Yes, we requested the focus, but we did that before adding the panel to our main panel. So we did that before adding P to our main panel. So again, I want to emphasize that the order of execution matters. Before you request focus in window, you need to make sure that the component that you're requesting focus is already added and rendered in the window. So before, you would have noticed that we requested the focus in window for P before adding P to the panel. This means that yes, after having requested focus in window, you've actually lost focus. So make sure you've added the panel and it's part of the window before you request focus in window. Now you'll see that the panel responds to our key events as appropriately. Let's have a look again. So I'm going to press some keys on my keyboard. So I've pressed the right key. Let's go back and press another key. Or let me get rid of those. I'm going to press a few keys and spell out my name. So it responds to all the keys because it's the current component in focus. The component needs to be part of the components shown in the window at the point where you request focus. So read that again. The component needs to be part of the components shown in the window at the point you request focus. So this is why you need to have added the panel to the main panel first before requesting focus in window. Otherwise you won't get the focus. And now I want to show you another example problem that you might come across. So initially you had focus on the panel, but then you proceeded to click a button, right? You clicked on button D. And then when you click on button D, the button D gets the focus. You'll see it's highlighted. But the thing is, you might want to go back to the panel and then type again. You'll see that you can no longer do that. But you can creatively write code such that when you click on the panel, you set the panel to focus. And I'm going to give you this as an exercise. Try adding a mouse listener such that when you click on the panel, it gets focus. Try to see if that can work. So right now I'm going to clean up this code and make it available to you so you can test it out on your own. So I'm mainly going to be removing the comments from this code. So I've cleaned up this code, and then let's clean up the imports. You can shorten up your imports list. So you can just simply say java.awt.event, java.awt.star, and then javax.swing.star. Those are the main imports that you need to make sure you have when you're working with UI projects. The next section will deal with drawing and graphics. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, click a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe.